After divorce, a lonely wife finds herself beside Millionaire, and her life changes forever. Emma thought her life had hit rock bottom after a painful divorce, but what started as a night of drowning her sorrows turned into something she never expected. Waking up in a billionaire's home, she found herself drawn into a world of unexpected challenges, hidden truths, and a chance to rebuild everything she thought she'd lost. What unfolds next is a journey of resilience, love, and personal discovery that will leave you inspired. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale disappointment. Emma Carter sat at the edge of the bench, her back stiff, despite the ache building between her shoulders. The room was too cold, the hum of the air conditioning too loud, and the drone of the lawyer's voice too sharp against her ears. Her divorce was nearly final. Just a few more signatures, a few more platitudes from the judge about fairness and amicability, and she would no longer be Emma Blake, no longer married to Connor Blake, the man who had once been the center of her world. She clenched her hands in her lap, her nails pressing crescents into the flesh of her palms. The papers in front of her blurred as her eyes welled with tears she refused to shed. Not here, she thought, swallowing hard. Not in front of Connor, who sat across from her with the same casual confidence he had carried throughout their entire relationship. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, his gold cufflinks gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He looked more like he was closing a business deal than ending a marriage. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the silence that had stretched uncomfortably long. "Ms. Carter, are you prepared to sign?" Emma blinked and looked up, realizing the entire room was waiting for her. Her lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed woman named Laura, leaned over and whispered, "It's just a formality. Sign here, and it's over." Over. The word echoed in Emma's mind like the final toll of a bell. She picked up the pen with a trembling hand, her signature looping unevenly across the bottom of the page. With that single act, her 10-year marriage dissolved into nothing more than legal jargon and a few crisp pages of paper. Connor didn't even flinch. He stood smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket as if he were leaving a meeting. "Take care of yourself, Emma," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. And then he was gone, his polished loafers clicking against the floor as he walked out of her life. Emma stayed seated long after the room emptied, her hand still gripping the pen. The silence pressed against her like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. Laura sat beside her, placing a hand on her arm. "It's normal to feel like this. Take your time." Normal. Nothing about this felt normal. Emma felt as if her entire identity had been stripped away, leaving her raw and exposed. She was no longer a wife, no longer part of a partnership she had built her life around. The betrayal that had led her here, Connor's affair with a younger, blonder, and somehow always perfect associate, was a wound that refused to heal. "I'll be fine," Emma said finally, her voice cracking. She stood and gathered her things, her movements robotic. The courthouse steps loomed ahead, and with each one she descended, the gravity of her new reality pulled her deeper into herself. The city was alive with its usual chaos, oblivious to the cracks in her world. Yellow cabs honked as they weaved through traffic, and the chatter of pedestrians blurred into a hum of background noise. Emma walked aimlessly, her heels clicking against the concrete, her mind a storm of thoughts she couldn't quiet. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a reminder of the life she was supposed to return to. Deadlines, clients, meetings. She silenced the notification without looking at it, the weight of her responsibilities feeling more suffocating than ever. "Emma!" A familiar voice called out, pulling her from her daze. She turned to see Natalie Rivera, her best friend, hurrying toward her with a concerned expression. Natalie's dark hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, and her tailored blazer screamed competence, everything Emma felt she wasn't. "I was about to storm into the courthouse to find you," Natalie said, wrapping Emma in a firm hug. "How are you holding up?" Emma let out a hollow laugh. "I signed the papers. It's done. So, I'm great." Natalie pulled back, her brown eyes narrowing. "You don't have to do this, you know. Pretend you're okay." Emma's facade cracked, and tears she had been holding back slipped down her cheeks. "I don't even know who I am anymore, Natty. Everything I built, everything I worked for, it feels like none of it mattered." Natalie sighed, guiding Emma to a nearby cafe. She ordered for both of them black coffee for Emma, a chai latte for herself, and sat across from her in the corner booth. "Listen to me," Natalie said, her tone firm but kind. "You are more than that man. You were always more. You're talented, brilliant, and stronger than you think." Emma stared into her coffee, her reflection distorted by the swirling liquid. She wanted to believe Natalie's words, but all she could see was the woman Connor had left her for. All she could hear was his dismissive tone when he told her she wasn't enough, not ambitious enough, not exciting enough, not young enough. That evening, after Natalie left her with promises of a better tomorrow, Emma returned to her empty apartment. The space felt cavernous, every room echoing with memories of a life that no longer existed. She poured herself a glass of wine, then another, her thoughts spiraling into the abyss of what-ifs and should-haves. By the time she finished the bottle, her vision was blurred, and her limbs felt heavy. She grabbed her coat and stumbled out into the night, the city lights blinding in their intensity. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay still. The last thing she remembered was the soft hum of jazz from a bar she hadn't noticed before, the warm glow of its sign cutting through the haze of her thoughts. The Velvet Room. She stepped inside, her head spinning, her heart heavy. What she didn't know was that this impulsive, reckless decision would change everything. Emma woke to the soft sound of waves lapping against the shore. For a moment, she felt weightless, as though floating in the calm between dreams and reality. But as her senses sharpened, the weight of her body returned, pressing into the plush surface beneath her. Her head throbbed in steady, punishing beats, and her throat felt parched, as if she had swallowed a mouthful of sand. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the golden sunlight streaming through an oversized window. The room around her was unfamiliar, modern and opulent, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing a breathtaking view of the ocean. Everything was impossibly pristine, the white linen curtains fluttering in the sea breeze, the sleek marble floors, and the muted grey furniture that seemed more suited to a design magazine than real life. Emma sat up too quickly, her head spinning as last night came rushing back. The velvet room, the warmth of jazz in the background, too many glasses of wine spilling over the edges of her control, a man's sharp suit, piercing gaze, a voice like smooth velvet. She pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to piece together the fractured puzzle of the night. "Good, you're awake." The voice startled her, and she turned sharply, wincing at the sharp pain in her neck. A man stood in the doorway, holding a tray with a glass of water and 2 small pills. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broad beneath a crisp, open-collared shirt. His hair was dark and slightly disheveled, as if he had run his fingers through it too many times. But it was his eyes, strikingly blue, like the waters beyond the window, that held her attention. "You," Emma stammered, gripping the edge of the bed. "Who are you? Where am I?" He approached slowly, placing the tray on the bedside table. "Liam Harrington," he said, his voice calm but laced with a hint of curiosity. "You're at my home in the Hamptons. You were... well, let's just say you weren't in any condition to get yourself home last night." The name hit her like a jolt of electricity. Everyone in New York knew who Liam Harrington was, billionaire tech mogul, founder of one of the most innovative AI companies in the world, a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms and splashed across magazine covers. But what on earth was she doing in his home? Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment as snippets of the night resurfaced. She remembered spilling her drink on him, no less, and slurring some incoherent apology. The memory made her stomach churn, though that might have been the hangover. I'm so sorry," Emma stuttered, her hands gripping the blanket tightly. "I didn't mean to—" "You don't need to apologize," Liam interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "I found you outside the bar. You were trying to hail a cab, but it was clear you weren't going to get far in your state, so I brought you here." Emma's brow furrowed, her embarrassment giving way to suspicion. "Why? Why not just call me a cab or something?" Liam shrugged, his expression unreadable. "You passed out before I could—" "It didn't seem right to leave you there, so I made the call." The silence between them stretched uncomfortably as Emma processed his words. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or humiliated or both. Her gaze dropped to her hands, the chipped polish on her nails suddenly fascinating. "Well, thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll get out of your way now." "You're in no condition to leave," Liam said matter-of-factly, gesturing to the glass of water and pills. "Drink that. It'll help with the headache." Emma hesitated, but eventually reached for the glass, her hands trembling slightly. The water was cool and soothing against her dry throat, and the pill's painkillers, she assumed, offered the promise of relief. Still, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of awkwardness that hung in the air. "So, Emma Carter," Liam said, his tone lighter now, as if testing the waters, "what brings you to the Velvet Room on a Wednesday night?" Emma's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "How do you know my name?" Liam arched an eyebrow, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Your ID fell out of your purse when I helped you into my car. I didn't rifle through your things, if that's what you're worried about." Emma's face flushed again, though this time with irritation rather than embarrassment. "Well, since you seem to know so much about me, let me return the favor. Liam Harrington, billionaire, genius, probably owns more homes than anyone should reasonably have. Am I missing anything?" Liam chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Not bad, though you left out rescuer of tipsy strangers." Emma shot him a sharp look, but the corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. "Thanks for the reminder." The conversation lapsed into silence again, but this time it felt less strained. Liam leaned against the doorway, his gaze thoughtful as he studied her. "You're different," he said finally. Emma frowned. "Different how?" "Most people would have been too awestruck or embarrassed to speak the way you just did, but you're direct, honest." He paused, his smile fading. "It's refreshing." Emma didn't know how to respond to that. She was used to being underestimated, dismissed or ignored by her ex-husband, by clients, by most people who only saw her as a pleasant but unremarkable woman. Hearing someone as accomplished as Liam Harrington call her refreshing felt strangely disarming. "Well," Emma said, her voice tinged with sarcasm, "glad to know I've left an impression." Liam straightened, his expression softening. "You should rest. There's breakfast downstairs when you're ready." Before Emma could reply, he turned and walked out, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She stared at the empty doorway, her mind spinning. The man who had carried her out of the chaos of last night wasn't what she expected. He was sharp, yes, but there was something else, something guarded, almost vulnerable, beneath his composed exterior. Emma sank back into the pillows, exhaustion tugging at her. This wasn't how she had planned to start her first day as a divorced woman, but then again, nothing about her life was going as planned. As sleep began to pull her under, one thought lingered at the edge of her consciousness. Who is Liam Harrington, really? And why does it feel like meeting him is just the beginning of something far more complicated? The smell of coffee drifted up the staircase, rich and inviting, tugging Emma from the uneasy haze of her nap. Her body felt heavy, as though the weight of her new reality, divorce, humiliation, and now waking up in a billionaire's mansion, had settled deep into her bones. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet brushing against the cool marble floor. She paused, letting the quiet opulence of the room wash over her again. The window framed an endless expanse of ocean, its waves lapping rhythmically against the shore. Emma stared at the scene, trying to anchor herself. It felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. How did I end up here? She thought again, the question echoing in her mind. Her stomach growled, breaking the stillness. Reluctantly she stood and found her shoes near the foot of the bed, neatly placed as if by invisible hands. Her wrinkled dress from the night before clung to her like a bad memory. She tried smoothing it down but gave up with a sigh, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders instead. She hesitated at the door, her hand resting on the cool brass handle. "What's the worst that could happen?" she muttered under her breath before stepping out. The house seemed even larger in the daylight, its open layout accentuating the sweeping ceilings and sleek modern lines. Emma followed the sound of soft jazz and clinking dishes, the music punctuated by the gentle roar of the ocean outside. She found herself in an expansive kitchen, its white countertops gleaming under the natural light pouring in through a wall of windows. Liam stood by the stove, flipping something in a skillet with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. He looked impossibly put together, his crisp shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He glanced over his shoulder as she entered, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Morning," he said. "How's the head?" Emma hesitated, her hand gripping the back of a chair. "Better, thanks. You didn't have to cook." Liam shrugged, turning back to the stove. "It's just eggs and toast. Not exactly groundbreaking." She sat, unsure of what to say. The space between them felt charged, like an unsaid question lingered in the air. Emma watched him move with practiced precision, setting a plate of scrambled eggs and golden brown toast in front of her before sliding into the seat across from her. They ate in silence for a moment, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional scrape of utensils. Emma's appetite returned with surprising force, and she finished her plate before realizing she hadn't thanked him. "This is good," she said awkwardly, breaking the silence. "Thanks." Liam looked up, his expression amused. "You say that like you weren't expecting it." Emma flushed, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "I just mean, it's not every day someone like you makes breakfast for someone like me." Liam's amusement faded, replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. "What do you mean by that? Someone like me?" Emma hesitated, choosing her words carefully. You're you, billionaire, genius, owner of this ridiculous house. And I'm just—" She stopped, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm just a mess." Liam leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're too hard on yourself." Emma laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Trust me, if you'd seen the last year of my life, you'd get it." His gaze didn't waver. "Then tell me." Emma froze, the words caught in her throat. Part of her wanted to deflect, to change the subject or brush him off, but the sincerity in his voice stopped her. She sighed, her fingers tracing patterns on the countertop. "I'm divorced," she said finally, the word feeling heavy as it left her mouth. "As of yesterday, 10 years, gone. My ex cheated on me with someone he works with, someone younger, prettier, more everything. And now I'm here, trying to figure out who I am and what's left of my life." Liam didn't react immediately, his expression thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but firm. "You're wrong about one thing." Emma frowned, caught off guard. "What?" "That you're not enough. You are." The intensity of his words left her momentarily speechless. She looked away, focusing on the ocean beyond the window. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I know what it's like to feel like you're not enough. To let someone else make you believe it." Emma's head snapped back to him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Liam hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Let's just say I've been in your shoes before, betrayed by someone I trusted. It's not an easy thing to come back from." The weight of his admission hung between them, unspoken but palpable. Emma studied him, seeing something deeper in his expression, something raw and vulnerable beneath the polished exterior. She realized in that moment that he wasn't as untouchable as she had assumed. Before she could respond, the sound of heels clicking against the floor broke the moment. A striking woman entered the kitchen, her tailored dress hugging her figure and her sharp features softened only by her perfectly styled hair. She exuded confidence, her presence commanding the room. "Liam," she said, her tone smooth but pointed, "I didn't realize we had company." Liam's jaw tightened, his demeanor shifting. "Julia, this is Emma Carter. Emma, my sister, Julia Harrington." Emma stood awkwardly, unsure whether to extend a hand. Julia's smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked Emma up and down, her gaze lingering on Emma's wrinkled dress. "How unexpected," Julia said, her voice dripping with polite disdain. "I assume you'll be heading out soon?" Emma opened her mouth to reply, but Liam cut in, his tone firm. "Emma's my guest. She'll leave when she's ready." Julia arched a perfectly groomed brow, her gaze flicking between them. "Of course. My mistake." She turned and left as quickly as she had appeared, her heels clicking like a metronome against the marble floor. The tension she left in her wake was suffocating. "I should go," Emma said, standing abruptly. "I've already imposed enough." "You're not imposing," Liam said, his voice steady. "Stay, please." Emma hesitated, her mind racing. Everything about this situation felt overwhelming, like she had been pulled into a world she didn't belong in. But something in Liam's eyes stopped her from leaving. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll stay." For the first time in a long while, Emma felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, terrifying, unpredictable, and undeniably intriguing. The late afternoon light bathed the Harrington estate in a warm golden glow, softening its modern angular edges. Emma found herself wandering through the sprawling house, unsure whether she was exploring or trying to escape her own thoughts. Every room seemed to whisper of wealth and control, pristine surfaces, perfectly arranged furniture, and walls adorned with abstract art that likely cost more than her yearly salary. It wasn't her world. It couldn't be. And yet, here she was, an uninvited guest in a billionaire's sanctuary. Emma paused in the hallway, drawn to the sound of soft piano music drifting from one of the rooms. She followed it, her steps hesitant, until she reached a sunlit sitting room. Liam sat at a sleek black grand piano, his fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. The melody was haunting, each note carrying a weight of emotion that made Emma's chest tighten. She leaned against the doorway, watching him. There was something raw about the way he played, his usual composed demeanor stripped away, leaving only vulnerability. For a moment, he seemed utterly unaware of her presence, lost in the music. When the final note lingered in the air, Emma clapped softly. Liam turned, startled, but his expression softened when he saw her. "I didn't know you played," she said, stepping into the room. Liam shrugged, his hands resting on the keys. "It's just a hobby, something my mother taught me before she passed." Emma's heart sank at the mention of his mother, and she hesitated before asking, "How old were you?" 14, Liam replied, his voice quiet. "She was the only one in my family who understood balance. She believed there was more to life than money and power." The admission caught Emma off guard. She had expected him to dodge personal questions, to deflect with charm or aloofness. Instead, he was opening a door, letting her glimpse a part of him that few likely saw. "I'm sorry," Emma said softly, sitting on the edge of a nearby chair. "She sounds like she was an incredible woman." "She was," Liam said, his gaze distant. Then he shook his head, as if shaking off the memory. "What about you? What keeps you grounded?" The question made Emma pause. She wanted to answer honestly, but the truth felt tangled in the aftermath of her divorce. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I used to think it was my marriage, my work. But now I feel like I'm just drifting." Liam studied her, his blue eyes piercing. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sometimes you need to let go of the old to make space for something new." Emma let his words settle, their meaning both comforting and unnerving. The moment was interrupted by Julia's sharp voice echoing from the hallway. "Liam, a word." Emma turned to see Julia standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression tight. Liam's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'll be right back," he said to Emma, standing and following his sister out of the room. Emma watched them go, the tension between them palpable. She waited a moment before curiosity got the better of her. Rising from her seat, she wandered toward the hallway, her steps silent. She knew eavesdropping was wrong, but something about Julia's demeanor unsettled her. Voices filtered through the crack in the door to Liam's office. "What are you thinking, bringing someone like her here?" Julia's voice was sharp, dripping with disdain. "She needed help," Liam replied evenly. "I wasn't going to leave her on the street." Julia scoffed. "You barely know her. For all you know, she could be a liability." "Not everyone has an agenda, Julia," Liam said, his tone colder now. "You don't have to like it, but this is my house, my decision." Emma's stomach twisted. She backed away, the weight of Julia's words pressing down on her. She didn't need a reminder that she didn't belong here. It was painfully obvious. Her instinct to leave returned in full force, but before she could act on it, Liam's voice followed her down the hall. "Emma?" She froze, turning slowly to see him standing at the end of the corridor. His expression softened when he noticed her wide eyes. "How much of that did you hear?" "Enough," Emma admitted, her voice tight. "It's clear I'm a problem." "You're not a problem," Liam said firmly, stepping closer. "Julia's just protective. She doesn't trust easily." "Protective or judgmental?" Emma countered, crossing her arms. "Because it sounds like she thinks I'm here to take advantage of you." Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's wrong. I don't care what she thinks." "But I do," Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. "You barely know me, Liam. And she's right. I don't belong here." Liam's gaze locked onto hers, steady and unwavering. "You belong wherever you choose to be. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Emma wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. "Why are you doing this? Why help me? You have no reason to." Liam hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because I've been where you are, lost, uncertain. I know what it's like to feel like the world is against you." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "And because I see something in you, Emma, something worth believing in." The weight of his words left her breathless. She searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity, but all she found was honesty. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll stay." That night, as Emma lay in the unfamiliar bed, her thoughts churned. Liam's words replayed in her mind, mixing with Julia's accusations and her own insecurities. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something new, a faint flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable. What she didn't realize was that the cracks beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect world were deeper than she could have imagined, and as her connection with Liam grew, those cracks would threaten to shatter everything. The next morning, Emma found herself sitting on the balcony of her guest room, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, its surface shimmering under the early sunlight. Despite the breathtaking view, a sense of unease lingered in her chest. She replayed the previous day in her mind. Liam's quiet intensity, Julia's cutting words, and her own wavering confidence. This wasn't her life. She didn't wake up in mansions or share breakfasts with billionaires. She didn't sit on balconies overlooking private beaches, wondering how she'd ended up tangled in someone else's world. But here she was. The sharp knock on the door startled her. Emma set her cup down and crossed the room, opening the door to find Liam standing there. He looked as polished as ever, dressed casually in a dark sweater and slacks that somehow made him appear effortlessly powerful. In his hand he held a tablet. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but businesslike. "I thought you might want to see this." Emma stepped aside, letting him in. He walked to the small sitting area by the window and placed the tablet on the table. She followed, hesitant, and sat across from him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice cautious. Liam tapped the screen, bringing up a series of sleek design mock-ups. "Your work," he said simply. Emma blinked, leaning closer to examine the images. They were her design's logos, brand concepts, website layouts. She recognized every detail, from the crisp fonts to the carefully chosen color palettes. "How did you get these?" she asked, her voice sharp with surprise. "You left your portfolio open on your laptop yesterday," Liam said, his tone unapologetic. "I took a look." Emma's cheeks burned with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "That's invasive," she said, crossing her arms. "You had no right." "Maybe not," Liam admitted, leaning back in his chair, "but you're incredibly talented. Why haven't you pushed this further?" The question caught her off guard. Emma fumbled for a response, her mind racing. I was working on it," she said finally. "But then life happened. The divorce, losing confidence. It all just fell apart." Liam studied her for a long moment, his gaze uncomfortably direct. "Life happens to everyone, Emma. What matters is what you do with it." The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Emma looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of her sweater. She had spent so much time dwelling on what she'd lost that she hadn't thought about what she could rebuild. "So what are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm suggesting you use this," Liam said, gesturing to the tablet. "Your work deserves to be seen. If you need resources, connections, anything, I can help." Emma stared at him, her heart pounding. It was an incredible offer, almost too good to be true, but something about it made her uneasy. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that for me?" Liam's expression softened, his usual guarded demeanor slipping just enough for her to see the sincerity beneath. "Because I know what it's like to need a second chance," he said quietly. "And because I believe in you." Before Emma could respond, Julia appeared in the doorway, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor. Her presence was like a storm cloud darkening the room. "Am I interrupting?" Julia asked, her tone clipped. Liam turned to her, his jaw tightening. "We're in the middle of something." Julia arched an eyebrow, her gaze flicking to Emma. "So I see." Emma shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder in the tension-filled exchange. Julia stepped farther into the room, her arms crossed. "Liam, we have a meeting with the advisory board in an hour," Julia said pointedly. "Or did you forget?" "I didn't forget," Liam replied, his tone calm but firm. "I'll be there." Julia's eyes lingered on Emma for a moment longer, her gaze cold and assessing, before she turned and left. The sound of her heels echoed down the hallway, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. "She doesn't like me," Emma said after a moment, her voice flat. Liam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Julia's complicated. She's protective of the family's reputation, sometimes to a fault. Don't let her get to you." "That's easier said than done," Emma muttered, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "She made it pretty clear she thinks I'm some kind of liability." Liam leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Julia doesn't know you, but I do, and I trust you, Emma. That's what matters." His words were meant to reassure her, but they only made her feel more conflicted. Trust. It was such a simple word, yet it carried so much weight. Could she trust him in return? Could she trust herself to navigate this strange new world without losing who she was? Later that evening, Emma found herself wandering the grounds of the estate. The air was cool, the sky painted in deep hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. She walked aimlessly, her thoughts swirling. Liam's offer was generous, almost impossibly so, but Julia's pointed remarks echoed in her mind, planting seeds of doubt. Was this really about her talent, or was she just some kind of project to him? Someone he could fix to ease his own guilt or loneliness. As she reached the edge of the property, Emma stopped and stared out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the rocks below, their rhythm steady and unyielding. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her uncertainty, her fear, her hope. She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing: her life was no longer defined by the shadows of her past. Whether she succeeded or failed, this was her moment to decide who she wanted to be. The days blurred into a strange rhythm for Emma, each one pulling her deeper into Liam's world. She spent her mornings sketching and refining designs, fueled by a cautious but growing sense of purpose. Afternoons brought conversations with Liam, his insight and encouragement chipping away at her doubts. And then there were the evening's quiet walks along the beach, stolen moments where the lines between business and something more began to blur. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. One crisp morning, Emma was in the study, poring over a new concept for a project Liam had suggested. Her tablet screen glowed softly in the warm light streaming through the windows. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Julia until her sharp voice broke the silence. "You're awfully comfortable here." Emma looked up, startled. Julia stood in the doorway, her arms crossed and her gaze steely. She was impeccably dressed as always, her presence exuding authority and precision. "I'm just working," Emma said carefully, keeping her tone neutral. "Liam asked me to refine these for the pitch." "Of course he did," Julia replied, stepping into the room. Her heels clicked against the floor, a sound that set Emma's nerves on edge. "But don't mistake his generosity for permanence. Liam has a habit of collecting projects." Emma frowned, her fingers tightening around the tablet. "I'm not a project." Julia tilted her head, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Aren't you? He found you at your lowest, brought you here, gave you resources, guidance. It's noble, really, but don't get too comfortable. When the novelty wears off, Liam moves on." The words stung, each one landing like a sharp jab. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but Julia raised a hand, cutting her off. "I'm not saying this to be cruel," Julia continued, her tone softening just slightly. "I'm saying it because you need to be realistic. My brother has a lot on his plate: investors, board members, the future of the company. Don't let yourself believe this is more than it is." Julia's words lingered long after she left the room, planting seeds of doubt that Emma couldn't shake. She spent the rest of the day distracted, her focus splintered as she questioned her place in this world. Was Julia right? Was Liam's support just another act of philanthropy, a fleeting kindness rather than genuine belief? That evening, Emma found herself in the kitchen, staring out at the darkened ocean while absent-mindedly stirring a cup of tea. The house was quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an unsettling stillness. "You look like you're miles away." Liam's voice came from behind her, pulling her from her thoughts. Emma turned to find him leaning casually against the doorway, his expression curious. He was dressed down in a simple sweater and jeans, a far cry from his usual polished look. Somehow, it made him seem more approachable, though it didn't ease the knot in her stomach. "Just thinking," Emma said, forcing a smile. Liam walked closer, his gaze softening. "About what?" Emma hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. She didn't want to voice Julia's accusations, not when she wasn't sure how much truth they held. Instead, she deflected. "About whether I'm really cut out for this, for any of it." Liam frowned, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "What makes you think you're not?" "I don't know," Emma said, her voice quiet. "Maybe it's imposter syndrome, or maybe I just don't belong here." "You do," Liam said firmly. "You're talented, Emma, more than you give yourself credit for." For a moment, Emma felt herself soften under his words. But then the doubts resurfaced, fueled by Julia's warnings. "What if I'm just a distraction?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if all of this is just temporary?" Liam's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "Did Julia say something to you?" Emma hesitated, caught between honesty and self-preservation. She implied that you have a history of taking people under your wing and then moving on. Liam exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Julia means well, but she doesn't always know when to stay out of it. She's protective of me, sometimes to the point of being overbearing. So she's wrong, Emma pressed, her voice quiet but insistent. Yes, Liam said without hesitation. You're not a project, Emma. I don't see you that way, and I'm not going anywhere. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and yet Emma couldn't shake the lingering fear that she was setting herself up for another fall. She looked away, staring into her tea as her mind raced. I don't know if I can handle getting hurt again, she admitted. Liam reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers. The contact was light but grounding, a reminder of the connection they had built. I'm not Connor, he said softly, and I'm not going to let you down. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. For the first time since her divorce, she felt a flicker of hope, tentative and fragile, but real. She nodded, the smallest of smiles tugging at her lips. Okay. The moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of Liam's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. I have to take this, he said, standing. Stay here. I'll be back. As he disappeared down the hall, Emma's gaze lingered on the spot where he had stood. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his words were genuine. But the doubt Julia had planted refused to disappear completely. Hours later, long after Liam had retreated to his office and the house had gone quiet, Emma wandered outside. The air was crisp, the stars scattered like diamonds across the dark sky. She walked along the beach, the sand cool beneath her feet, and let the sound of the waves drown out her thoughts. Standing at the water's edge, she made a silent vow to herself. Whatever happened, whether Liam's intentions were genuine or not, she would rise from this experience stronger. She would no longer define herself by the betrayals of her past or the doubts of others. As the waves lapped at her feet, Emma felt a sense of clarity. She couldn't control what Liam or Julia thought of her, but she could control how she moved forward, and that was a power she was finally ready to claim. The next morning, the ocean breeze carried the faint scent of salt and seaweed into the house. Emma stood in front of the bedroom mirror, her reflection staring back with a mix of apprehension and resolve. Today felt different, like the fragile hope she'd been nurturing was ready to take root, despite the lingering doubts Julia had planted. She smoothed her hair, tying it back into a loose ponytail, and chose a simple outfit, dark jeans, a fitted blouse, and a cardigan. Her mind buzzed with plans for her design concepts, each detail sharper than it had been in months. For the first time since her divorce, she felt a sliver of her old confidence returning. When Emma stepped into the kitchen, she found Liam already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. He looked up as she entered, a small smile softening his otherwise serious expression. "Morning," he said, setting the cup down. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," Emma admitted, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She hesitated before adding, "I've been thinking about the project." Liam's brow lifted, curiosity flickering in his eyes. And I want to do it," she said firmly. "Not because I need your help, but because I believe in the work. I believe in myself." A genuine smile broke across Liam's face, and he nodded. "That's what I wanted to hear." They spent the morning working side by side in the study, poring over designs and refining details. Emma's doubts began to fade as she lost herself in the creative process, her mind buzzing with ideas and solutions. Liam offered insights, his feedback precise but encouraging. Their dynamic felt natural, as though they had been collaborators for years. But just as they hit their stride, Julia entered the room, her presence as cold and sharp as ever. "Liam," she said, her tone clipped, "we need to talk." "Now." Liam glanced at Emma, his expression apologetic. "Excuse me," he said, standing and following Julia out of the room. Emma's chest tightened as the door closed behind them. She could hear their muffled voices in the hallway, Julia's sharp and insistent, Liam's calm but firm. Unable to resist, Emma moved closer to the door, straining to catch their words. "She doesn't belong here," Julia said, her voice rising. "This isn't her world, Liam. She's going to drag you down." "That's enough, Julia," Liam replied, his tone low and controlled. "Emma is talented, driven, and more than capable of holding her own." "She's a liability," Julia shot back. "You're too close to see it." There was a long pause before Liam spoke again, his voice softer but no less resolute. "I trust her, Julia. That's all you need to know." The words sent a rush of warmth through Emma's chest, but they were quickly overshadowed by the weight of Julia's hostility. She backed away from the door, her heart pounding. The doubts she had fought so hard to suppress clawed their way back to the surface. Later that evening, Liam found Emma sitting alone on the balcony, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The sky was streaked with deep purples and oranges, the sun sinking slowly into the horizon. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Emma shook her head, and Liam pulled up a chair beside her. For a moment, they sat in silence, the rhythmic sound of the waves filling the space between them. "Julia's wrong about me," Emma said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm not a liability." "I know," Liam said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Julia's protective, but she doesn't know you like I do." Emma turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Why do you trust me, Liam? Why take this risk?" Liam hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "Because I see something in you. Resilience, integrity, the ability to see the world differently, creatively, authentically. That's rare, Emma, and it's worth fighting for." Emma's throat tightened, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I've been so afraid of failing again," she admitted, "of losing myself like I did before." "You're not going to lose yourself," Liam said firmly. "Not this time." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emma threw herself into her work, channeling every ounce of energy into the project. Liam was by her side, offering support and guidance, but never overshadowing her. Slowly, her confidence grew, each completed task a small victory in reclaiming her sense of self. But the turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Emma received an email from a prestigious design firm she had applied to months ago, before her life had unraveled. They had seen her recent work shared by Liam with her permission and were impressed. They wanted her to present her portfolio at their upcoming showcase. Emma stared at the email, her hands trembling. She had spent so long feeling invisible, doubting her worth, but now an opportunity she had once dreamed of was within reach. She looked at Liam, who had just entered the room. "I got an invitation," she said, her voice shaking. "They want me to present my work." Liam's smile was radiant. "That's amazing, Emma. You've earned it." The day of the showcase arrived, and Emma stood backstage, her nerves threatening to get the better of her. She wore a sleek black dress, simple yet elegant, and clutched her notes tightly in her hands. Liam appeared beside her, his presence grounding. "You're going to be incredible," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thank you for everything." Liam smiled. "You don't need to thank me. This is all you." When Emma stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. She began her presentation, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She spoke about her journey, her struggles, her doubts, and how she had found her voice again. Each slide of her portfolio felt like a testament to her resilience. By the time she finished, the room erupted into applause. Emma's chest swelled with pride and relief, her smile genuine and unrestrained. Backstage, Liam was waiting, his expression filled with admiration. "I told you," he said, pulling her into a brief, warm hug. "You were incredible." For the first time in a long time, Emma believed it. Months later, Emma stood in her own small design studio in Manhattan, her work displayed proudly on the walls. The space was hers, a reflection of her journey and the person she had become. Liam visited often, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. Emma had found her footing, her strength, and her voice. And as she looked toward the future, she knew one thing for certain. Her past no longer defined her. This was her story now, one of resilience, ambition, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. Emma's journey reminds us all that life's most unexpected turns can lead to the most profound transformations. From heartbreak to hope, she proved that resilience and self-belief can pave the way to a brighter future. Her story isn't just about finding love, it's about rediscovering herself and embracing the life she truly deserved. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more inspiring and dramatic tales. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.